give you some more music about more information about him. But let's check out his work with the man Curtis Amy. And he worked with a lot of, well, he was from the West Coast, and most of his work was in his early years is with West Coast bands, and Curtis Amy is one of the major forces out in West Coast in those days. This is a track composed by Curtis Amy, and it's called For Ears Only. Curtis Amy. Sounds of one of his early employers, the man Herbie Mann, from an album called Memphis Two-Step. We just heard the title track, featuring, of course, the great Roy Ayers on vibes on that. And we started off with a track taken from Curtis Amy's album, Tipping On True, captured live as a live performance at the Lighthouse, which was a major meeting place for a lot of musicians back in the day. Hermosa, California. And there's so many great recordings out of that club, Lighthouse. And the track we played was For Ears Only, a track written by Curtis Amy, specifically for the man Roy Ayers. All right, let's tell you a little bit about his early life. He was born in Los Angeles. He was born Roy Edward Ayers Jr. on September 10, 1940, and he grew up in a musical family. His father played trombone and his mother played piano, so he had a great start. At the age of 5, he was given his first pair of vibraphone mallets by none other than the man Lionel Hampton. The area of Los Angeles that Ayers grew up in, South Park, became later known as South Central, was at the center of the Southern California black music scene. He growing up there, he attended Thomas Jefferson High School, a school that was a formative part of the Central Avenue jazz scene and produced various talented musicians, including the great Dexter Gordon. During high school years, Ayers sang in his church choir and fronted a band named the Latin Lyrics, in which he played steel guitar and piano. Let's check out his an album that he recorded, was released on the pt2 Jazz record label, fronted by the man Joel Dawn, and featured a lot of the musicians that he'd worked with through the years. He has Gary Batts on this with Charles Tolliver, Hubert Laws, Herbie Hancock is on piano. John Carter plays a couple of bass on a couple of tracks, and Miroslav Vitus also does. Grady Tatum on drums. This is his version of Jobim's Wave. Make sure, yes, Wave. This is Roy Ayers from Stone Soul Picnic.